Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast with me, Karen Maloney. I am your host, and the intention of this podcast is to help us open our minds, get curious about ourselves, and to raise our vibration and consciousness levels. Through these conversations, we hope that you will go on an inward journey to discover the truth of who you are and to become aware of your own energy and vibration. We have the power to consciously create our lives, but we need to wake up to this fact before we can begin the process and learn the key of self-responsibility. Check out the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Acast, Castbox, or whatever platform you listen on, and please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Leave a review, leave a rating, as this will help it to reach more people. Check out my website as well, Soul Power Light, www.soulpowerlight.com. Hello everybody, welcome. Thanks for tuning in and joining me for another episode. It is me, Karen Maloney, and I have another wonderful guest for you today, and a really brilliant and empowering conversation, which, I don't know, sometimes we don't have too many conversations, or you don't hear too many conversations around the topic of abuse and abusive relationships. So I was delighted to connect with Sandy Johnston, who is my guest today, and she shared some of her story that is really quite traumatic at times, but super empowering as well in the work that she's doing now and how she has grown and what she has learnt through her experiences. So Sandy is the founder and host of the Tiaras, Tears and Triumphs podcast, and she's also the founder of Sandy J Abundance Life Coaching. As a certified life coach, as well as a survivor of an abusive relationship, she has turned her pain into her power. Being a writer and a speaker, she uses her voice to speak up and speak out about the issue of domestic abuse. She now helps women who have been hurt by abuse to heal and grow and become empowered to ultimately regain control over their lives. Her aim is to help women rise to their true value by rebuilding their self-esteem and helping them remove their limiting beliefs to release them from their past so they can go on to unlock their potential and thrive. Ooh, there is just so much in this conversation. It really is a super important conversation to have. Sandy shares some of the statistics around abuse, but she also talks about some of the red flags, some different types of abuse, how women especially can be more susceptible, but not always, because we can get infatuated very easily. Or Sandy talks about how she went from a toxic marriage and into this abusive relationship. It was like falling out of the frying pan and into the fire, and how easily it can happen. She also speaks a little bit to the empath and the narcissist and that dysfunctional relationship. She shares lots and lots of truths about her own journey and her own learnings. She shares how it happens so easily, how we think, oh, it would never happen to us. And even she says how herself, a seemingly intelligent person, could be in this decade-long abusive relationship that really got to a point where her ex had attempted to blow up their home with herself and the children inside. So it's a lot in this conversation, but it's also full of lots of information for anyone who may be in a situation like this currently, and what tools or supports could help them, but also for the family and outsiders and loved ones and friends. Sandy shares lots of ways that they can support that person in that relationship. We all have ideas of what that person may need, but actually asking them and being able to be there for them in the capacity that they need is really important, as well as family members or the loved ones looking after themselves as well, because it absolutely is a stressful situation for them as well. A conversation I'm really grateful to Sandy to have had and to share on the podcast this week. And she also shares about the incredible work that she does now with other abuse survivors and helping them reclaim their own sovereignty and joy and live an abundant life, which she is currently doing now, although she is still on her healing journey and her children. But she talks about the importance of self-care and especially women prioritizing themselves as well. So there is so much information here. The conversation is a little bit longer than normal, but it's a really captivating and a really empowering story, and especially how, again, as Sandy mentions, turning that pain into power, and everything that she's been through, it has not been in vain. And although she's still growing and learning and healing, she is bringing so much good to the world, and really an inspiration and showing others that it is possible to leave a situation like that. It is possible to reclaim your life, and it is possible to thrive and get back into a place of abundance and living out your potential. So enjoy, and to find more on Sandy's work, you can go to her website www.sandyj.com.au. But as always, I will have everything linked as well on the show notes on my website, soulpowerlight.com, and click the podcast section. Enjoy. Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in and joining for another week. And I have another wonderful guest this week. Her name is Sandy Johnston. And first of all, you're very welcome, Sandy. Thank you for joining today.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for having me on the show today. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I'm sure it might be a bit of a painful listen maybe for some people, but it's a really, really important topic. And I think especially, well, always, but even now in this year and the challenges we've faced with being stuck at home in different aspects, and really, I suppose your work really now in using your voice and speaking against domestic violence and helping others in that situation. So maybe if you would share a little bit first on your story and how it happened for you, maybe.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about it. It's not easy revisiting, my story and talking about the things that I went through and that my children went through. But because I know that I am not alone and my children are not alone in going through this, that the statistics are actually really shocking, that 1 in 3 women have been through some form of abuse in a relationship, and the statistics are quite similar for children too. And when you just look at those statistics and have a think about the impacts of that on a person's life and how that then hurts them, and that pain that they carry from those experiences, the complexities of that, and how that actually really bleeds over every facet of their lives, and that the healing journey from that is something that requires a lot of time, a lot of intervention, a lot of support. And it's really distressing to think that these sorts of things happen within a person's home, which ideally should be a safe space. And not only should you feel like you should have that in your home, but it's actually something, it's a right. And because abuse is such a sweeping broad brush of different things, it's quite easy for people to actually have misconceptions and be misguided about what actually constitutes abuse. And a lot of times people will think that abuse is something that equates to being physical violence, and there's not such a good understanding of other types of abuse, like psychological abuse, which really does impact very deeply on a person's life. But there are also many other forms of abuse. There's a really big rise in cyber abuse these days, which a lot of people are suffering from. And this is a whole new area, which I think is a big problem, and just trying to control a problem like that is really, really difficult in and of itself. So as far as my experience, my personal experience with domestic abuse goes, I really fell into that category of being misguided about what I was actually going through in my relationship, identifying it as being a form of abuse. And the reason being is that there was a lot of psychological abuse going on, and a lot of manipulation and coercion. And my ex-partner was a very jealous person, and that is one of the signs of a narcissist, is if they appear to be jealous. There's red flags in a relationship, in a new relationship, that can alert a person to the dangers that lie ahead in that relationship. But my experience and many other women's experience is that we have this tendency, because of infatuation, to put on rose-coloured glasses in those early days, and so it's very easy to gloss over those early warning signs and dismiss them as not being dangerous. We don't want to see the danger in it, because we want to see the relationship blossom into something, wonderful. That's, what our heart desires. However, one thing that is and will not change is that we are only ever in control of ourselves, and we are never in control of another person. So if another person is displaying behaviour which is not healthy, then, if just gained from my experience, a little pearl of wisdom is to actually heed those warning signs. And I had a very good friend when I encountered this new relationship and started developing this relationship with this person, and my very, very good friend said to me, "Be careful with this one. Are you sure you want to pursue this? Because I think he's a player." And I didn't want to believe that, even though there were signs that that was the case. And so I had this man who was telling me all the things that I'd ever wanted to hear a man say to me. He was gregarious, he was charming, he was very charismatic, he had the gift of the gab, he was just so entertaining. And so he's like this showman, and it was, all the entertainment was going on, and I was captivated by that. And and that made me feel really, really good. But there was this other side of him, there's this duality to him, and this other side of him was kept fairly hidden from me. But in saying that, it's very interesting when if you pay attention to your body sends you signs of when things are not right. And I had this, uneasy feeling in like the pit of my stomach right from the get-go with this relationship. So some might mistake that as being butterflies.
Yeah.
So it's very easy, because people wonder and they think, well, how on earth did somebody of, seeming intelligence fall prey to this type of relationship? It's very, very easy to fall prey to this type of relationship. And I just fell hook, line and sinker, and I pursued this relationship, and I ended up then having my first child in that relationship. I had been through a divorce prior to this, so I guess it was like falling from the frying pan into the fire, because my marriage, there was really toxic things going on in that. I was craving and seeking, love. And then the next relationship was even more unhealthy than the marriage that I had exited. And this is actually another quite normal thing for women to go through, or people to go through, because, when I talk about this, I because I'm a woman, I try and identify with other women, but I do not in any way, shape or form dismiss that narcissistic behaviour also comes from women in relationships. So this is one of the things that it's a very complex thing, because narcissism and empathy, or empaths, are like mirrors to each other. And these are a reason why we tend to fall into these types of relationships, because they're reflecting things in ourselves that we need to grow and develop in. So for me as an empath, I needed to learn how to love myself. I needed to learn how to put safe boundaries around myself. This was part of my learning journey, the process that I had to go on in life, and I was going to keep getting presented with this type of thing until I started to learn that this is what I needed to have a healthy relationship. So thank God I have learned from that. But in that relationship, I won't go into massive detail. We don't have a lot of time to actually go unpack that relationship from the time that I entered into it until the time I exited it. But I will say that it was like a revolving door relationship. There was never stability in that relationship right from the get-go. And as I said, there was all of this jealous behaviour, and things like we would be walking down the street together and another man would pass by. He would look me up and down. Now, this is quite, I'm not saying it's appropriate behaviour, but it is quite a normal, natural instinct in people to notice people. And rather than just let that go, because who cares, that person's just moving on and I'm just moving on, so what's the big deal? My ex would address that person in a really horrible way, using foul language, and tell them to get their effing eyes off me. And, in those sorts of moments, I wish that the ground would just open up and swallow me up, because I just felt so embarrassed, because it wouldn't just be this person and us. There would be other people in the street that would, observe what was going on. And it was just horrible. It was horrible, horrible behaviour. There was substance abuse, that impacted on my ex's behaviours in the relationship. And I don't know, how much of a difference there would have been without the substance abuse, but because the substance abuse was an issue and it was something that he kept hidden from me as best he could, because he knew that I was not approving of him using substances in the context of being a parent and being a responsible adult. And not just that, I just knew that it was damaging for him and his health. It was, he just wasn't able to sustain a normal life as long as he was using harmful substances. And so this was a massive issue in the relationship. And this issue was one which he became a user and an abuser. So because the addiction was controlling him, he then would use and abuse anybody he could to continue on with his addiction. So it was a very, very complex relationship. Of course, because I loved him, I wanted to try and help him and support him in beating his addiction and getting his life back onto a good track again. However, that was another learning curve for me, where I learnt over time that I was actually enabling him to continue his addiction because I had not created a safe boundary around myself and drawn a line in the sand and said, that's it, no more. You can't, like, as long as you continue, you can't have this relationship with me. It did get to that point where that is what happened. But to get to that point, I lost everything. I lost my home, I lost my car, and I lost all financial stability and security in trying to work through the issues with him.
Wow. And just thank you for sharing all that, so much that you've shared there. And I definitely want to come back to a couple of things, but just of an idea of a timescale of how long this relationship was.
It was a decade, spanned a decade. And in that time, we had 3 children together.
Okay, yeah.
So that was the course of the relationship.
Thank you. Just to have a kind of timeline of, the time frame you're talking about as well. But something really interesting that I think is really important as well that you mentioned earlier was about the red flags and the early warning signs. And I know you mentioned jealousy and a few things, but are there other, because especially in your work now as well and knowing your own journey and helping others, are there other more common kind of red flags or warning signs that people can be aware of?
Yeah, sure. Look, there are lots of different warning signs in the early days of a relationship. And I would say that the biggest warning sign to look out for is basically, are they walking their talk? So are they actually congruent with their actions, with what they're saying? So that's a really big warning sign is if you're being told one thing and that's not being backed up. So, for instance, it might be that they've said that they will call and they don't call. It might be that just those sorts of things where they've made arrangements with you and then they don't follow through with it.
Yeah.
So, or if they say that they're there for you and then you call them, out of the blue and you're not treated openly. So I think openness is a big, if you look at a scale of openness and see how open they are. But I would also say one of the things really for women to learn to do to keep themselves safe from narcissistic men, or put the shoe on the other foot and flip it around between a man looking out for a healthy relationship with a woman. Communication is key. It's just finding out some values, getting to know that person first before you invest yourself emotionally too much in that relationship. So, just keep everything in equal measure. So if you're at that sort of dating stage, I mean, it's easy because, all the hormones are raging and you've got this, chemical attraction going on between you. And so, you're kind of like, well, who cares? I really, like we really click, So if we really click on that physical level, then surely, like the rest of it's going to sort itself out.
Yeah.
But they're two different things. They really are two different things. And so I think, you really need to be clear on your expectations, because one thing that I don't want to give men a hard time, but if you allow a person open slather with what they can and cannot do with you, if you do not have any safe boundaries around yourself, then you leave yourself vulnerable to be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important for you to work out, rather than, so much like looking at these red flags, but, the stronger you are in yourself, the stronger you are in knowing what you will and will not stand for in terms of the way that you will be treated by another person, will strengthen that internal voice in you, which will alert you to the red flags and make you more alert to the danger and identify it as being something that, no, do I want this in my life from somebody else? Do I want to be treated this way? Well, no, I don't. And to know that you deserve better than that, instead of holding out for things to improve. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of explaining this, but I know that I allowed myself to be used, I think, right from the beginning of that relationship. So I think, I can say that now. If you would have asked me that, 16 years ago, then I would have said to you, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of protecting myself.
Yeah.
But I don't think, now I can honestly say, no, I left myself open because I wasn't clear about what I wanted, and I wasn't prepared to stand by that. I allowed myself to be compromised a lot. But there some other indicators are things like just anything that you would classify as being creepy. Are they stalking you? Is there stalking related behavior? Do their values match your own values? It's really important to find that out, because if that is not a good match, then the relationship, you'll find, unless that person is prepared to grow in that relationship with you, then you can't change another person. All you can do is work on changing yourself.
Yeah, and you said something there as well that's it's so vital. It is the key, really. And thank you for your honesty in, you said you allowed yourself to be used. And this is what happens when, like you've mentioned, when we don't know ourselves, when we don't know what truly we want, when we don't have those healthy boundaries. Or I can't remember who said that quote, but we teach people how to treat us.
Yes.
I can't remember who said it, but that's essentially true as well. And again, it's not that it's anyone's fault per se. We're not taught this. Kind of a lot of, I think, people who come to this journey is either, they've been through something, or they're very into, have a curious mind and they do their own self-learning, because these aren't the skills and life skills and tools that like you're taught in school or anything like that. You kind of often, we learn them through difficulties, through challenges. And, I suppose that's my intention with my work and this podcast, and now with your work, in helping people, realize this before they end up in some kind of a situation, because especially so many people, and especially women, are empaths, that word you mentioned as well. And again, when we don't have healthy boundaries around that, that is the perfect energy for a narcissist, because again, we're all human, we're all meeting needs. And that is just the perfect dysfunctional match. but it
Yes.
seems great at the beginning, but then it's like, oh no, hang on. So much you said there is really important. And like that, it's been mentioned on so many different podcasts, that key of self-responsibility and coming back to ourselves and knowing our value and that we are worth so much more and we don't have to settle. So you mentioned as well when you were talking about the boundaries and not honoring yourself and eventually, you know, drawing a line in the sand. When did that come for you, and what did you do at that time then to try and make shifts in your life? And had you tried before?
I think I had tried everything under the sun. Really, it was like I was just constantly in clean up the mess mode. And I'm not just saying that about, you know, like I had 3 young children, 4 years, you know, and under, you know, like, so I had my hands completely full. I was like a chook with my head cut off, running around in circles all day long. But on top of that, I had this issue with my ex with trying to help him with his addiction and trying to get him on the right track so that he could be a responsible adult and he could be a partner to me and he could help me with raising the children. He could be a father to his children, all of this. So I was just in, you know, like damage control all the time. And what happened is that over time things just got progressively worse for me, and there were things like he was stealing from me. So when I said I went through psychological abuse, that was only one of the forms of abuse that I went through. And I'll just say this, that 99% of women who are abused are also financially abused. So this is one of the reasons, like there's these different components that really play heavily on whether a woman stays in an abusive relationship or whether she leaves. One of those is the emotional aspect of being an empath and wanting to find the solution and wanting to help the heart that you have to want to help somebody else, especially somebody that you care about, in fixing their life, is one thing that hope that you live with, that tomorrow's another day, that this is another opportunity, that this promise that he made, that he would change, that this was the last time he was done with drugs, it was the last time, and that he would change, these promises that you'd be made. And so you'd live in hope with these false promises that you were being given. And, you know, you would make these ultimatums like I would make and say, right, well, if you're serious about this, because, you know, you have given me 100 promises to say that you will stop using drugs, and evidently you cannot stop using drugs, especially you cannot stop using drugs on your own, that you need help and support. And guess what? I figured out I can't help and support you with it because I'm not experienced. I am not equipped to help you with this issue. So you really need to go to rehab. And so he did 2 attempts at rehab, but they were never successful, and the reason being is because I was the one who had given him the ultimatum. I was the one telling him he needed to change. He wasn't the one saying, I need to change. I really need to change and I really want to change, because unless he was the one saying it and feeling it, it was never going to happen. He would go back again to his habit. So what happened is there were things that came with the drug addiction, sex addiction, you know, so there was sexual abuse there as well. There was the financial abuse as well. And he was also stealing from me, you know. So I would do things. So eventually what I did is there was a parent in the children's kindergarten who was a police officer, and I spoke to her about some of the things that were going on for me, and she said, you need to involve the police. You need to get an intervention order or a restraining order to stop him from doing the things that he's doing to you. And I said, really? And I said, I was really scared to do anything, because he always felt as though he was above the law. He felt like he was a maverick. He felt like he could do anything that he wanted. He could get away with it. He had ties with the mafia. It was, for me, to try and take that step to involve the law to protect myself and my children absolutely terrified me. Yeah. So I did end up doing that, and I knew it, my gut just said, this is going to get worse now, and it did. And so the first time he said, right, what have you done? Why have you put this restraining order against me? I don't abuse you. I don't beat you. And, you know, and I was just like, oh, maybe I've done the wrong thing. Maybe I've done the wrong thing. So I went back to the court, and I took the order back to, he just cannot commit family violence, but it meant that he could still come onto my property. You know, we had separated by that time, and that was the reason why I put the restraining order in place, is because I had no peace, absolutely no peace in my life, and I needed to put a boundary around myself and my children to say, you can't just come here anytime you feel like it. He had a tracking device on my phone, stolen the hard drive from my computer with all the children's photographs on it. He knew where I was, who I was communicating with, what I was saying to them in text messages. He hacked my Facebook accounts. There was just like any aspect of my life. He tried to, you know, he changed my passwords, locked me out of accounts, you know, tried to get into my bank account. It was just everything. Like, I'd go to pay for groceries, and lo and behold, there wasn't enough money to pay for the groceries because he'd taken money out and I didn't know about it. So he just was like sabotaging every aspect of my life. So I did get the intervention order back in place. He pleaded with me to have a conversation with me one night. He came to the property, and even though he wasn't allowed on the property, he pleaded to talk to me, and I allowed it, because I knew that if I did anything that I didn't know what he was going to do. So I just like played along with it. And this is the thing, is that women all have to try and find all these different strategies to try and keep themselves safe. And so I allowed this conversation, and in this conversation he was pleading with me to take him back. And I said, no. I said, look, I'm never going to be in a relationship with you again, but you can still be a father to your children. And he said to me, no us, no kids. And when he said that, I just thought it was a veiled threat of him just having a bit of a tantrum and just using that psychological manipulation and saying, well, if you're not going to take me back, then I'm not going to see the kids. And because that had been the pattern, is that anytime I tried to make an arrangement for him to have some normal contact prior to the restraining order with the children, he'd always mess with it, and he wouldn't turn up for, you know, like he'd leave it to the 11th hour, and then he'd pull out, and the kids would be disappointed. And he was just trying to manipulate the situation so that the only way that he saw the kids was at the house, so that he could push his foot back in the door again. So anyway, that we had this conversation, and I just thought, oh, this is just another one of his tantrums, and I know that I'm just going to keep dealing with the same situation. It's where I'm just trying to stay a step ahead of him, but I'm not. I'm always 10 steps behind him. And 10 days later, I came home from work with the kids. I just picked them up from the bus and opened the front door, and there was gas pouring out of our house, and there was a fluid heater with a naked flame. So it was just a recipe for an explosion. So he tried to blow the house up, and, you know, the kids and me with it. So that was my wake-up call, because up until that time I'd been deluding myself that he was the one with the problem, therefore he should be the one to leave, and he should be the one to just leave us alone. That was my logic, and my logic was sound, and the law said that my logic was sound because I had an intervention order saying you cannot come within 200 metres of my property or my person. You cannot contact us unless you're using a lawyer to make, formal arrangements to have contact with the children. So I had all of this logical protection in place, but that was just like nothing to him, because as soon as I had that, it was like he was ticking off all the terms of things that he couldn't do, and he was doing those things, and it was just a game of cat and mouse. And when it got to that point where the kids and I could have died, I just realised that we couldn't stay. And it took me a while to get my head together about this, because it just, when it happened, it was so surreal that I just couldn't fathom that this could be happening to me or happening to my children. And what the hell do I do now? What does one do when confronted with something like this? How do you adapt to that? So, of course, I had all the different services involved as far as the police goes, and family violence services, and life became very, very harrowing and complicated, and things continued to spiral. He would steal the security cameras that I put in the house. He'd come in and he'd steal from the house. I was barely sleeping, but I was sleeping with my purse underneath my pillow to try and stop him from stealing from us in the middle of the night. I just, my safety, or my sense of safety was just completely gone.
How could you have any sense of safety? If you were feeling all of that, or just constantly watching or thinking, what's he going to do next? Is he going to appear? Is that door going to open? What's going to happen?
Absolutely. 24/7, I was looking over my shoulder. I had to adapt all of our routines. Things like the kids couldn't go on school camp because I was just too fearful about sending them away and what might happen. And everything changed for me. It was just horrible. So after that, within 6 months, which seems like a long time, but there were a lot of things that happened in that time. I moved house, thinking that maybe moving into a different house, which was more secure, would enable us to stay in our community and for the kids to continue in their school and for me to continue in my job. It just all became completely unmanageable. I had to pull the kids out of school 5 times to go into hiding, and then that was it. I just went, we have to go. And at that time, the opportunity that I had, the police had remanded him. They could not find enough evidence to charge him on the more serious offences. And so they had, because I had been keeping a record of every minor breach that he had made to the restraining order, it gave the court enough evidence to substantiate that he was a persistent, or like a recidivist offender, a repeat offender, and he, and that was a real danger to myself and the children. The courts could see that, and so he was sentenced. He was remanded without bail, and that was my opportunity. I had 3 weeks to garage sale or yard sale our belongings to try and raise enough money to, get the bond and a first month's rent and, removalist truck for us to relocate somewhere. We moved 6 hours away, changed our names, left our family and our friends and everything behind, and went into serious hiding to try and stay safe. And we were just shattered, absolutely shattered, absolutely traumatized. So, and from that point, we needed to begin to try and piece our lives back together again. Yeah. It was fairly short-lived. It only lasted for 7 months, and he tracked us down, and then we had to relocate the second time, go through another name change. And thankfully, because he did another stint in jail after that, thankfully, from what I have heard, he didn't want to ever go back to jail again. And so our lives have things have settled down. We haven't had any trouble from him. We're now 5 years on from that. And
Wow.
I also managed to get an indefinite restraining order against him so that the children and I would not have to go back to, or I would not have to go back to court on our behalf every year, because a
Yes.
lot of these restraining orders only have a term of 12 months,
Wow.
and which means that it's necessary for the victim to reapply to the court and go through all the trauma again of
Yes.
having
Yeah.
to visit the court about the problems that they're having because of another person, to try and seek the protection that they need from the court. It's a very, very stressful thing. The whole court system, the justice system, is miles behind where a victim needs it in terms of actual protection. So there's a lot of resources that you have to tap into to actually navigate the whole problem of domestic abuse. That's why I was saying at the very beginning of our conversation that it is complex.
Yeah.
It's no walk in the park for anybody. Breaking free from this kind of relationship is no walk in the park. And it's not as if the second that it ends that you are back to normal again. I have been through significant trauma counselling. After going through that, I still see my counsellor, at least once a month. I really need to do that. Even though I have come leaps and bounds from the traumatised mess that I was 5 years ago, I am still on my healing path.
Yeah.
And this is something that people really need to understand, is that it's a process. The healing is a process and it needs time. And so the dysfunction that happens from the dysfunction can go on for a long time. I've got 3 children who have been through major trauma, and although they're relatively normal kids, there's still trauma in their life that they will unpack as they grow up, and they will benefit from having counselling when they're going into their adulthood. I've say to my children, if you ever feel like you need to speak to somebody, please let me know and I'll organise it, because it is something that they will more than likely need to tap into because of the pain that they've been through in their past.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that as well. I can't even begin to imagine like that of what it must have been like to live with that level of fear and always constantly, like you say, looking over your back and thinking, trying to protect your children and everything as well. And even for them during the time, what did they think?
In no way were they oblivious to it. In no way were they oblivious to it.
Yeah.
So my youngest child was 6 at the time when it happened. They were all very, very young, and they'd had all of this compounded psychological trauma leading up to this time as well. So with the dysfunction of what was going on. But when that happened, my daughter, her heart was absolutely shattered that her father could do something like that, because she thought that she was the apple of his eye. This is the thing, is that how can it happens. It does happen. You cannot fathom how somebody could do that to their children. You can't. It's just unimaginable, but it does happen, and something inside a person snaps, and these things happen, and they go past over this line that of no return. And so she was absolutely heartbroken, and and my heart just broke for her, seeing how broken she was by what happened. The responses in my children were all different. They're all different people. And their responses were all different. And I had one of my sons, and he was angry, and that he just had this rage in him, absolute rage for what happened. And he was only 7 at the time. And my youngest, he seemed to be okay, but he wasn't. He was just broken inside. He was sad and, sad and just lost. And I know that the thing with my children that breaks my heart so much is that their childhood was stolen from them because of this dysfunction. And as much as I tried to protect them physically, I couldn't protect them from that loss.
Yeah. And, that's part of the healing journey as well, and the processing and the going within, and no more than you, and the work that you're doing now in helping others through your extremely traumatic experiences. But from having gone through all that, you have so much wisdom and courage and true empathy, but of a protected, healthy kind, in supporting another going through that as well. And I have no doubt as well that your children, through their learnings and processes as they continue on their journey as well, will have they'll just have such tools to help another as well, or whatever they choose to do in their life as well. So it's that thing of the journey and the processing and the time and the allowing. And you've shared so much today, and 5 years is still, it's a decent time, but it's really very short as well, from such a huge decade of trauma like that. But something that, because you've mentioned as well about honoring yourselves and how we can ultimately only control ourselves, and until we make a decision, or we can't control anyone else. How, for anyone, say in a situation, now, whether it's domestic violence, and obviously friends and family maybe on the outside can see it's not healthy, but like that, we can't intervene without someone taking that decision as well. But are there ways that people and family and friends around a loved one can support them in a situation like that would be beneficial?
Absolutely. When I shared that experience about his drug abuse and me trying to help him with that issue, it makes it quite compromising for people who are close to you to help in some of the critical ways that you need support. But there are certainly ways in which family members can support, and that is by being there in terms of being readily available for the other person. They could also be, saying, I will be your safe person. So they could work out a signal between them. So if they communicate via Skype or Zoom, or as a lot of people are, still quite separated from each other. So if they've only got that type of communication with each other, try and build up the communication to have regular contact, so that it appears normal to the perpetrator, and then have some sort of secret hand signal between you, so that if things are dire and you can't actually express it in words because the person is there, then have a hand signal that indicates that you actually need some intervention. And then that safe person can, do what they need to do. If they need to call the police to do a police check, or if, they're able to pop around and check in on you, those sorts of things can be really helpful. Ask the person what they need. Don't try and think about what you think they need. Ask the person what they need, because the person in that situation is obviously the most experienced as to know what they actually need in that moment. And so if they're not feeling safe, they'll be able to tell you that, if you're able to offer them refuge, then offer them refuge, because that is a huge thing for women, is that they feel trapped in their home and unable to leave their home and go elsewhere. They don't know where to go or who to turn to. And so if you can offer that refuge to them so that they know that they've got a couch to sleep on or a bed to sleep on, and they can leave when they need to, let them know that there's no shame in what they're going through, and not to be embarrassed about any of it, and that you are not going to judge them. These things are so important, because women are held back and kept prisoner by their shame and their embarrassment about what they're going through. So if you can be that unconditional love for them, then that is going to be a saving grace to them. That's going to empower them and enable them to reach out for the support that they need, so that they can be safe and they can hopefully, break free from that relationship. They can get the support that they need. Encourage them to seek counselling. There are many, many free online counselling services with domestic violence in different parts of the world. If they can't source it, perhaps you can source the information for that and share that with them. Be that type of support, okay? There's so many ways that family can support. I know that it brings a whole lot of pressure onto the wider family members when they know that somebody that they care about is in an unhealthy relationship, or a toxic relationship, or an abusive relationship. Their problem becomes your problem too. And that stress can impact on you. If you need to reach out for support to deal with that, then do that. If you can tap into some counselling yourself, then do that, so that you have more objectivity. You are, more objective about how to deal with it, rather than having this emotional baggage that you're carrying from the stress that you're carrying from the problems that they've got in their life. So they're just a few tips. I hope that they help. Biggest thing is just reach out and get some support.
No, they sound really important, and especially that whole thing of no shame and no judgment, because sometimes I can imagine someone on the outside, because of their love, they just want to scream or say, my God, just leave, or something like that. And it's just it's that real difficulty, because they're coming from a place, but it's not so easy for the person either. So just being that person, that safe place, that unconditional love, like you mentioned, is what they need.
And I'm not saying it's easy for support people to do that within the family. I'm not saying it's easy. It's really not, and that's why I'm saying, encouraging you to also reach out and get some support, so that you're better equipped to deal with this, because it is a very complex problem, and it's not just black and white. And as you said, Karen, your love of that person and your desire for them to be okay will probably drive you to say things that that person isn't capable of doing. It's because it's like a black and white thing, and you can see it. You can see they shouldn't be there. You can see that they'd be better off being out of that relationship. But, you've just got to try and be an unconditional support to them, and be there for them however you can be.
Yeah, because and this is why it's such a super important conversation as well, and to have you join today and to go there again and share that vulnerability and share the story of what it's actually like being in the situation. You're just so, like you say, it's not black and white. I think it's just a really important side of the conversation and the story to acknowledge as well, because like you say, from the outside everyone can be like, oh, like, why, it's so easy, just walk away, or it's no good. But like you say, it's not that straightforward. So thank you for sharing all that. And I know we've gone over, but I feel we can't wrap up though either without talking about your work now and the incredible work that you are doing in helping others, and really how you've turned your pain into power and into a support for others as well. So please share, a little bit about your work now and what you're doing to help others as well.
Thanks, Karen. I'll make it really brief because I know that we have gone over too. So I have a podcast called Tiaras, Tears and Triumphs, which is a safe space for women who have been through some form of abuse to feel supported in the challenges that they face. I also work one-on-one with women to coach them. I really try and work on an abundant life mindset. So it's basically unblocking the mindset that is holding them back with limiting beliefs, with the things that they are going through, so that they can really become empowered and regain control over their lives again.
Amazing. Super important work as well. And I'm curious, when you started as well on your healing journey as well, what practices and tools really helped you at the start, or maybe that you still continue as well?
Yeah, okay. So I have read a lot of self-development books. That's been really, really important to me. The Serenity Prayer, for anybody who knows, the Serenity Prayer has been one of my saving graces. And I love meditating. I do a lot of guided meditations because I've had this overly anxious mind. So I've had to really cultivate the art of mindfulness. And I think guided meditations really help me to change my mindset. So there's some of the things that there are other physical things that I do. I walk. There was a long time where it wasn't safe for me to walk. So these sorts of things, like, you need to choose things that you can incorporate into your life and do them as consistently as you possibly can. So the more self-care that you can do is obviously, going to make a really big impact, because you need to be looking after you. When you look after you, and this is one thing that women are notorious for, is that they will put themselves down the end of the list of priorities and put everybody ahead of themselves, particularly mothers. If you use that analogy of you're in an aeroplane and before you take off, they run through the emergency, procedures, and they say, right, if you need to put your oxygen mask on, you put your oxygen mask on yourself first, then you put your oxygen mask on, the next oxygen mask on the child. So it's really, that's such a good analogy for women to understand that they need to take care of themselves in order to be able to take care of others. So there's some of my tips.
Love it. Thank you so much. And just as a parting question as well, I'm curious of where you're at in your journey now at the moment, and how you said, even since, 5 years ago, how you've changed leaps and bounds. Where you're at now, how do you reflect on what's happened in your life?
I'm just so grateful, absolutely so grateful to be where I am now. I am so aware of the peace that I have in my life, again, which is absolutely priceless to me, and the stability that I have now. And just that my life feels so abundant on so many levels now, which is, I just feel really, really blessed and very grateful.
Wow, what a powerful message as well. And to me, that just says, you're just a complete inspiration and an example of how anything is possible, really, when we take the responsibility, when we honor ourselves, when we do the work, process our pain or that. And well, you say it, it's part of your work, turning your pain into your power. And that's really, really beautiful. So I would love you as well to share, before we wrap up, of where people can find out more information about your work. And like always, I will have everything linked on the show notes as well.
Thank you, Karen. So if you want to find me, you can find me at www.sandyj.com.au. You can find me on Facebook under Sandy Johnston, and you are always welcome to tune in to the Tiaras, Tears and Triumphs podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sandy, for joining today. That's just such an inspiration. And there were so many more things and questions I wanted to ask. I could have spoken forever, but thank you for sharing and thank you for speaking up, because like that, I think it's really important, and you are and will continue to help so many others. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today, Karen. I've loved this conversation with you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified every time a new show is released. Get more information on this week's guest as well on my website www.soulpowerlight.com.